What happens if your own government is using more force and more coercion on its own citizens for the purpose of achieving its political ends? Is that government engaged in terrorism?
American people expect us to protect them and protect their civil liberties. I'm going to do that.
What is being sold to the American people today as Americanism, if you peel off the label, you find so much similarity to what we were fighting against when we were fighting communism and Nazism and fascism.
The government's now putting a national ID card together.
We will be carrying our papers, and they have recommended there be checkpoints throughout the country. Some type of physical proof, such as fingerprints or retinal prints, have to be on it.
Desires of the people really have no consequence. They go out and they vote. Doesn't make any difference which candidate they elect.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections? Yes.
This is absolutely Orwellian. I mean, it's talking about Big Brother looking over your shoulder at absolutely everything you do.
There is no constitutional basis for a tax on the wages of Americans living and working in the 50 states of the Union. Period. End of argument.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
You caught me unprepared.
I'll come back.
Well, I don't want to do that.
There had to be a law, right?
Where is the law? Show me the law.
Why is the Supreme Court decision a silly argument?
And I think we're finished.
They think it's the law, and they have all the guns. You know, it's an authoritarian approach.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The latest technology for identifying people when they make purchases is actually the implantable chip that you can actually embed directly into human flesh.
Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? You will rule on that, mark my words.
A chip in everybody would be the universal monetary system par excellence. Because there'd be no escape from it.
Americans have been taught to expect their salvation from government instead of recognizing government as the most dangerous threat they'll face in their lives.
It is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated by government against the working men and women of America.
It's organized crime. All you do is you call the Republicans the Genoveses, and you call the Democrats the Gambinos.
Hello, my name is Stephen Vasquez, and I am the New York State Coordinator for Campaign for Liberty. On today's show, we interviewed Katherine Albrecht. Katherine is a best-selling author of Spy Chips, How Major Corporations and Government Plan to Track Your Every Move with RFID. Katherine has a doctorate from Harvard University, and she is the host of a daily syndicated show, Dr. Katherine Albrecht, which can be heard on GCN.
Well, the best way to understand RFID is to understand what the acronym stands for. The RF part stands for radio frequency. The ID part stands for identification, and that's because they're tiny microchips, little silicon wafers containing information that are hooked up to miniature antennas that use radio waves to transmit. So what that means is that if you have one of these tiny devices, the little microchip with its antenna combination, you can put those in literally anything. You can embed them in a plastic card like an ID card. You can put them in a passport. You can embed them into somebody's shoes. There literally is a company that is marketing RFID tags embedded in people's shoes that they would not know was there. You can sandwich them between the layers of cardboard. They can go into virtually anything. And once you've got the RFID tag inside of an item, it lies dormant until it's stimulated by radio energy from the environment. So, for example, if you walk through a doorway, if the doorway is equipped with an RFID portal or RFID reader, it kind of bombards you head to toe with this energy, and if you're carrying something or wearing something that contains an RFID tag, that energy is picked up by the antenna, stimulates the chip, wakes it up, gives it just enough power to transmit its unique information. And in the case of most RFID tags, the information is a unique serial number, and the long-term plan for this is to create something called the Internet of Things, where literally every object on Earth, and when I say every object, they are envisioning every sewing needle, every jumbo jet, every pair of shoes, every Bible, literally every object on Earth containing one of these tags. The Internet of Things would be a way to track, monitor, and keep tabs on where everything is all the time. there's really three different areas of concern for people who are worried about the privacy impact of having someone scan them through these tags. One of them is the use of RFID tags in products, which we talk about extensively in our book Spy Chips. The idea there is to put them into, you can weave them into clothing labels, you can put them into the seams of fabric, you can put them into shoes. There is ultimately a plan to use them to replace the barcode. And that's how you wind up with literally every object containing one. Once that happens, you can not only be tracked through the things that you buy, you own, you wear, or you carry, but as you walk through the doorway, now an inventory of everything you're wearing and carrying can be made. And because RFID tags, RFID energy, radio frequency energy, travels through the things we normally rely on to protect our privacy, like plastic or fabric or leather, it means that someone would be able to inventory the contents of your backpack, the contents of a woman's purse, everything in your pockets, all the way down to the size and color of your underwear. So that's sort of the first risk, is tagging products. The second risk is tagging people. And that breaks down into two different ways that the RFID industry is looking to do that. One of them is through things that you would carry mandated by law, such as a driver's license, a passport. In some countries, they're actually mandating the use of RFID tagged identity documents that people have to carry, like China, where China was the biggest RFID market on the globe last year, ordering over 1 billion RFID chips to place in the pockets, wallets, backpacks, and purses of the Chinese citizens so that their communist government can simply point a reader device at someone walking down the street and identify that individual. In China, it's actually quite chilling. When you look at what they're doing, they've actually linked up those RFID chips in the ID cards with information that ranges from someone's employment background, their educational history, their reproductive history, even their landlord's name and phone number. And China right now is experimenting with these surveillance cities. It's begun with the city of Shenzhen, China, where they've literally rigged the entire city with all sorts of surveillance devices, everything from video cameras, surveillance cameras, hidden cameras, all the way down to RFID readers positioned in strategic locations so they can track people. So that's sort of a direction that we're moving, is using this literally and very specifically to track people. And then your third way, or the third concern, also has to do with tracking people, and that's the RFID implant, where there's actually an implantable version, has the tiny microchip, has the antenna, in this case the antenna is sort of a coil wrapped around the microchip, encapsulated in a capsule of medical grade glass, and that is injectable and has been injected into about 2,500 people worldwide to date. That device goes into, typically they're putting it somewhere between the elbow and the shoulder, but the more obvious place would be the hand, because you would want to press it against a reader or transmit that data more directly and more easily. And those microchips are problematic for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that we've discovered that they cause cancer in between 1 and 10% of laboratory animals that they're injected into. Well, the Real ID program, I think for anyone who cares about liberty and is concerned about intrusive big brother government, is really a nightmare. The idea is for every American citizen to carry a driver's license that would be controlled not by their individual state and their individual Department of Motor Vehicles, as is the case today, but would actually be controlled by the Department of Homeland Security. So what we're in essence talking about is a national ID card, very similar to what's being done in communist countries like China. The Department of Homeland Security taking control of driver's licenses means that we would have a federal database containing enormous amounts of information about individuals, and that information is not only subject to Big Brother abuse, certainly, for anyone I think who follows our issues I think would immediately be aware of that, but it's also subject to abuse by hackers and criminals, because when you have low-hanging fruit of a database of all of the information on American citizens in a single location, all it takes is for one determined hacker or one huge colossal screw-up on the part of somebody for all of that information to get out. And at that point, they don't just have information on the motorists in the state of Utah or the state of Alabama, but at that point, they have information on the motorists for the entire nation. One of the big concerns now is you've got all of the border states being contacted by and sort of co-opted by the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department to begin offering RFID tagged driver's licenses. Now, when we first stumbled across RFID back in 2001 and 2002, when I was one of the only people sounding the alarm about this technology, we were told repeatedly by the industry that because this was tracking technology, plain and simple, that it would never be used to track people. Very specifically, that it was inappropriate to put it into identity documents, that it would never be used on people, because the technology was developed specifically to track and trace products and items in warehouses. This tag that they're putting into driver's licenses in the states of Washington and New York, and now shortly in the states of Michigan and Vermont, and also Arizona, all of which have agreed to participate, this tag can be read right through your pocket, right through your wallet or your backpack, from 20 to 30 feet away, silently, invisibly, without your knowledge. You would have no way of knowing when and if it was being scanned. And we know, based on information that we have found, that there is a definite interest in doing that. When IBM discussed tracking people in public locations, they talked about doing it for marketing purposes, first of all, so they could tell how long you linger in front of certain sections of the store. And also they talked about doing it to track suspicious persons and handing over the infrastructure to the government. And I don't know about you, Stephen, but it seems to me like ever since September 11th that the government's definition of suspicious person has expanded to the point where it now includes law-abiding American citizens, every single one of us. The notion of having people carry RFID tags on their person is enormously problematic for a number of reasons. Perhaps best illustrated by something we talked about in our book, Spy Chips. IBM has developed something it calls the Person Tracking Unit. Talk about a great name. They came up with it, they patented it, and that's what they called it. Now, their person tracking unit is a reader device, or a series, or actually an entire planet full of reader devices that would pick up the signals, or stimulate and pick up the signals based on RFID tags carried by people in order to identify them and track them. Now, IBM talks about placing these types of readers, which can go into doorways, they can go under floor tiles, they can go into ceiling tiles, shelving, walls, furniture, anywhere you go. They talk about using these to identify and track people in so many locations that it blows the mind. They talk about doing this in theaters, in sports arenas, in shopping malls, in theaters, in libraries, in elevators, and even public restrooms. So that literally everywhere you go into the public restroom, there could be a reader device behind the tile of the stall that would be monitoring and tracking you if, and here's the if they can find a way to get you to carry an RFID tag. So and IBM, by the way, which patented that, just won the contract to do the national ID cards for England. So they're very much involved in national ID cards. They're very much involved in RFID. They've been one of the key companies promoting this technology from its inception. And now you have IBM with its patented method of tracking and monitoring people's locations. Now, in doing our research for Spy Chips, my co-author, Liz McIntyre, and I reviewed about 30,000 different documents. We went through white papers, we went through schematics, technical documents, confidential documents, promotional documents, you name it. And what emerged from that huge sifting process of looking through all of the future plans that the major corporations and governments of the world have for RFID is they very much intend a world in which your every move is tracked. Now, their big frustration, and one of the things we found over and over, was sort of a hand-wringing of how do we get people to carry these devices. So at this point in time, here in the United States, Janet Napolitano, who is our new Director of Homeland Security, has specifically said that she is considering scrapping the unpopular Real ID program and replacing it with a national enhanced driver's license. Well, that's a fancy way of saying a spy chip driver's license with the RFID tag on it. And that would make the person tracking unit of IBM, that would make plans by Accenture, plans by Philips Electronics, plans by a whole host of companies, Intel, I mean the list goes on, to track and monitor people. That would make it possible, because if you tuck one of those things into your wallet or your back pocket, you then become trackable by this entire infrastructure of RFID surveillance. Well, that's the argument, of course, that Homeland Security and the Departments of Motor Vehicles are making about these enhanced driver's licenses. But the reality is that once they have that unique ID number and it's associated with you, it becomes your number essentially for life. So these RFID tags are poised to become the Social Security numbers of the 21st century, where every place you go, if I can pick up that number, then I can identify you. So probably the best way to understand it is to think about Facebook. Most people, if not, many people, if not most people on the internet today have a Facebook account. And on that Facebook page, there's a whole host of information. You've got photographs, you've got a list of your friends, you've got information about what you do and where you've been and what you've done, anything that you post on there. Well, all your Facebook account is a single DNS number. When you punch in the URL, it translates back to a number and pulls up that information. Well, what the RFID industry envisions in this Internet of Things is every physical object on Earth, including every person, to have their own equivalent of a Facebook page. And when I punch in your unique ID number off of your enhanced driver's license, then what I would wind up getting is an entire page of information about you. When I punch in the number from your shoe, I get information. Where's it been seen? Was it seen walking through the doorway of the Atlanta courthouse, and then it was seen walking through the doorway of the local mall, and then it was seen walking through the doorway of perhaps a protest rally of some sort. So all of that information would be logged into a database entry, and that's why they refer to this Internet of Things, where literally every physical object will have this entire record. So in the case of a pair of shoes, it might say where it was made, what sort of labor went into it, what materials it was made out of, what shipping facility it was sent to, which crate it came over on from China, what store it was sold at. But where it really gets disturbing is then it goes on. Who bought it? What credit card number was used? What date was it purchased? Where else has it been seen? And so you can see over time, these unique ID numbers actually become associated with some pretty intimate information. Well, I think the real risk is not only identity theft, but stalking and domestic violence. The National Network to End Domestic Violence is one of the most outspoken critics of this technology in the country. They've submitted testimony to legislators around the country against RFID because what it makes possible is a network where someone could be tracked. So because your enhanced driver's license, and of course you'll never get one, Stephen, so I'm saying this hypothetically, but because an enhanced driver's license contains a unique ID number and no other data, there is a claim by the government and the folks issuing these things, Department of Homeland Security and the states, that there's nothing whatsoever to worry about. Well, the reality is there's a reason why we don't have our Social Security numbers printed across the front of our shirts, because Social Security numbers at this point are keys to unlock vast databases of information. So if I know your Social Security number, I can go in and I can get your credit history, I can pull up information about your mortgage, I can pull up information about possibly your medical records, a whole variety of things. And what is going to happen if this continues to move forward the way it's going is that your national ID card, your enhanced driver's license real ID card, is going to have a number on it, and that will be your national ID number. It will be the Social Security number of the coming century. And having that information will not only unlock a vast database of information about you that will be linked up with every activity you engage in, but and as well as every place you go, because they're going to be recording that also. But in addition to that, it will enable anyone who can get a hold of that information to track you from that point forward. In other words, sitting next to you right now, we're about probably 5-6 feet away. If I had an RFID reader, first of all, you wouldn't know it. It would be relatively small. I could put it in my purse. And I could be aiming that at you right now. I would get back a unique string of numbers that would follow a particular pattern, so I would know it was your enhanced driver's license number. And from that point forward, anytime I want to identify Stephen Vasquez, all I have to do is use that number. So that becomes sort of a data cloud that follows you everywhere you go. Reader devices that pick up that number will certainly know that you just passed by. And I can create my own database of information about you. I can enter in that you're running Campaign for Liberty here in the state of New York. I can put in information about places that I know that you've been in the past, people that I know that you know. And at that point, anyone who picks up your number can log on, and this is where this really gets interesting, log on to the Internet of Things and look you up. Well, that's one of the real problems with the enhanced driver's license is of all of the RFID standards that they could have chosen, the Department of Homeland Security chose the least secure, longest range RFID chip on the market. So this is or at least the least secure, longest range standard RFID chip available, something called a Gen 2 for Generation 2 or second generation RFID tag. These are the ones that were developed for use in warehouses like Walmart, where your goal is maximum tracing and trackability of products. Now, there are other forms of RFID they could have chosen that are encrypted, that have a shorter read range, but they chose the one that can be read from 30 feet away by not just government readers, by any RFID reader. You can go into a back room at a Walmart distribution center, and there are minimum wage employees carrying around the reader devices that you could then turn around and aim at a person walking down the street and read their RFID tag driver's license, read their enhanced driver's license. There's literally no encryption, there's no protection, there's no data scrambling, there's nothing. You can read the number in the clear. So it is just mind-boggling that the Department of Homeland Security would choose that particular standard for RFID. The only possible explanation is they wanted maximum traceability and trackability of these tags. So the short answer to your question, there is no security whatsoever, and this is going to leave us open to widespread abuse and tracking, not just by criminals and hackers, but also by corporations that would love to get access to these databases and trace and track people around. Yeah, I read that one. And in fact, in that MIAC report, the Missouri report, they even said if you're concerned about RFID, then you may fit the profile of a domestic terrorist. So I guess a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. I think that whole move towards profiling individuals is going to be accelerated immensely if we get these RFID tag driver's licenses. Let me give you an example. I'm going to be giving a speech this evening here in Albany for the John Birch Society. And it is possible for people at the door to simply pay a couple of bucks and walk in and be part of that group. I've spoken to groups all over the country, literally thousands or probably tens of thousands of people at this point. If they wanted to, let's say we fast forward 10 years to the point where many of the people in the audience would have one of these enhanced driver's licenses in their wallets, especially if they become mandatory. If they wanted to, the government could simply pose as yet another person interested in getting the information, mill around the crowd with an RFID reader in their backpack, and collect these unique ID numbers for every single person at that event, and then put them on a watch list for being interested in RFID. Heavens. I mean, that's crazy, but that's one of the things they actually said in that Missouri report. Another example, depending on your politics, any First Amendment protected event could be subject to the same kind of tracking. You could have FBI agents showing up at a gun rally or a peace march or a pro-choice or an anti-abortion event, whatever it might be, and simply by walking through the crowd with a reader device, they could download scores, dozens, hundreds of unique ID numbers from these individuals, and then immediately one-to-one identify them through this federal government database of who they are. Not just who they are, where they live, with their eye color and their height and their date of birth and their place of birth and every other piece of information that would be connected with an identification document. Clearly, in the Constitution, there is no authority for the government to do that, and indeed, there are some very specific restrictions against the government doing this sort of thing. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, of course, in the Bill of Rights, gives us the right to be free from search and seizure without a warrant that the government would be engaging in, tracking people and rifling through their wallets and figuring out what they're carrying and wearing. So obviously all of this is very much against the Constitution, and I think it's also, as a Bible-believing Christian, I think it's against the religious and spiritual beliefs of many, many people. And I don't think you even need to have those particular beliefs to find this repugnant. There are one of the things that I really like about working on RFID is it really unites people from the left and the right, from all sides of the political spectrum, as they say, well, gee, nobody really wants to be spied on, no matter what your beliefs are. So it's been kind of interesting seeing the Cato Institute and the ACLU together in the same room testifying against the same technology. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as we begin to realize this is not about left and right. It's not about Christian, Muslim, Jew, atheist, that this is really about freedom versus control. That's really what this boils down to. And you're going to see a polarization in this nation of people who are going to split along those two lines. And I'm looking forward to the time when we all unite over our other differences and say, listen, I'm for freedom and I don't care about the other stuff. The real problem when you start creating databases of information is you create what I've before called low-hanging fruit. You create a very simple one-stop target for anyone who wants to capture that information and use it to create fake identity documents or to essentially hack the system. So you take a look at California, for example. California has had a huge problem with criminals, essentially criminal gangs, infiltrating their Department of Motor Vehicles, literally getting jobs there, becoming supervisors there, and then using their position to obtain driver's licenses and identity documents for undocumented immigrants, we'll call it that. And then using that for criminal purposes to create fake ID cards for people. The California Department of Motor Vehicles periodically has to go in and have a purge and fire enormous numbers of people. They've done it now several times. Well, the problem, if you're in California, well, gee, tough luck. I'm over here in New Hampshire. We're out here in New York. We don't have to worry about that because the focus is really in California where they've got a big illegal immigration problem. Once you have a national database, though, then obviously all of those criminals are going to move their way over to the Department of Homeland Security, and they're going to start hacking into all of our driver's licenses and hacking into all of our photographic databases and personal information and social security numbers and using it to create these fake ID numbers in mass. And to think that that's not going to happen, I think is to be incredibly naive. Well, I think the key thing that we need to do is educate the public. I am shocked at the number of people who have signed up for these enhanced driver's licenses without having read spy chips, without having informed or educated themselves about this issue, believing the mollifications that they've been given by their departments of motor vehicles in the states of now Washington and New York and soon these other states as well. We need to educate them and let them know, listen, what you've just put in your wallet is not just an easy way to cross the border. What you've just put in your wallet is a remotely readable tracking device, and here are the dangers of it. See, people don't understand that. I think until we get that level of understanding, and of course there's a second piece to it too, is people need to understand that government is not necessarily their friend. And I think that's one of the issues that Campaign for Liberty is really, I think it's crucial, the sorts of things that you all are doing in educating people about government abuses, about government, excessive government power. One of the things that guides my research, and one of the things that has motivated me to spend 10 years of my life now working on freedom and privacy issues, is a book by R.J. Rummel. He's a University of Hawaii professor. He wrote a book called Death by Government. And he's devoted an entire academic career, literally decades, to researching something he calls democide, which is the killing of people by their own governments. And what he has discovered is that in the 20th century alone, that more people, in fact 6 times more people, were murdered in cold blood by their own governments than were killed by all of the century's wars combined. And he concluded from that government is the most deadly force on planet Earth, second only to natural causes and disease. So literally, if you empower your government, this is also what he discovered, that what distinguished countries whose governments behave themselves versus those whose governments became oppressive, abusive, corrupt, and ultimately deadly, was the amount of power that the people had given those governments. That was well understood by the founding fathers of this country. It's one of the reasons why they crafted a constitution to keep us protected against excessive government power. It's one of the reasons we had we have it in the Constitution, but we had pretty strong checks and balances to try to prevent any one branch of the government from becoming excessively powerful. And that's because those founding fathers understood full well that excessive government power leads to abuse. And perhaps they even understood that it would lead to genocide and the sorts of things we've seen in the last century. Well, I've got a daily radio program. I'm on Monday through Friday from 4 to 6, right after Alex Jones on the Genesis Communications Network. That's online at gcnlive.com, GCN for Genesis Communications Network. My personal website is online at KatherineAlbrecht.com. And we've got 2 other websites that people may be interested in. The Spy Chips website contains a lot of the information from our book, Spy Chips. Information about product tagging, places where you might find RFID tags slipped into things, an explanation about RFID, and a lot of stories of our battles fighting against the industry, in many cases quite successfully, I may add. And if you're interested in learning more about microchip implants and they're linked to cancer. We have not only an extensive cancer study, but also an 85-question FAQ document that answers any possible thing you could ever want to know about microchip implants in humans or in animals, and that's online at antichips.com. And hopefully between all of that, you should be able to catch up on the RFID story. And if I could put in a plug, if I could... we spent 3 years of our lives writing this book. I have a doctorate from Harvard University, so I'm a well-trained researcher. My co-author, Liz McIntyre, is a former federal bank examiner and one heck of a researcher and also a hilariously funny writer. And this book is not only impeccably well-researched, it has hundreds of footnotes, but it's also a page-turning, entertaining read. And I would recommend at this time, our only mistake was the book came out a couple of years before its time. Its time is right now. This is the time that people should be reading Spy Chips, because all of the things that were being discussed in this book that we put together are all now coming to fruition. So take 5-6 hours out of your life, read the book, and you will be an expert on RFID, and you'll know almost as much as I do, because I put it all in the book. Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure talking to you.